All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name's Camille. I'm the beekeeper here at Chenard's. Been working here for a little over 4 years now, so starting to get some experience under my belt. So forgive me if I ramble on and go off on a million tangents. So let's get going with hive inspections and problem solving. So just a quick overview of the class. It is going to be a long class, so forgive me if I go over the hour. We're going to go over why to inspect your hive, why not just leave it and let them do their thing, how often to inspect your hive when you've established that you do want to inspect it. How are you going to talk to other beekeepers? You should learn frame hierarchy so you can understand how to communicate to other beekeepers, what frame you're talking about and what's going on. Physical hive inspection walkthrough, how to actually go about inspecting your hive, keep your bees calm, actually get the information that you are looking for. I think probably shutting the door is a good thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's really good noise. I don't know if it's bothering anybody else.
Swarm prevention, this is mainly a spring thing, but can happen into fall as well. Swarming in fall can be quite a bit more of a problem, so we'll go over that briefly. Common frame problems, misdrawn frames, damaged frames, frames with comb that you don't necessarily want that is kind of properly drawn. We'll go over drone comb, seasonal feeding ratios, what you should feed when, exceptions to those rules as well. If you've ever talked to a beekeeper, you know that there's pretty much an exception to absolutely everything they talk about. And then we'll go over pest and disease recognition and management. That's going to be basically the whole second half of the class. It's a little bit more in depth. So again, forgive me if I ramble on. So why should you inspect a hive in the first place? Why not just let them do their thing? There are a lot of different reasons why you should inspect your hive, particularly if you have your hive in a more urban setting. You don't necessarily want them doing their own thing, bothering all of your neighbors. So you want to go in, you want to make sure you know when to add additional boxes. You want to make sure that the bees are not overcrowded. They're not going to be swarming. You want to know when to feed. Has the weather been bad? Has the forage been bad? Do you need to feed them extra? Is something going on? You need to know when to reduce or enlarge their entrance. Are they really packed and they just can't get in through a small entrance? Are they being robbed and they need a smaller entrance that's easier to defend? You also need to inspect your hive to know, well, when to harvest. You can't just look at a calendar and go, I'm gonna harvest July 18th. It doesn't really work that way. You need to actually inspect those frames and make sure they are ripe for harvest. Also really important to do your hive inspections so that you can gauge the health of your colony and the hive equipment and the queen itself. So you don't necessarily ever need to see the queen, but you do need to see signs that she has been there and signs that she has a healthy, good brood pattern. Condition of boxes and frames. Boxes and frames don't last forever, even if they are painted. Sometimes your frames will lose a bottom or a top or a side, or they'll be improperly drawn. You need to replace them. So beekeeping equipment is not forever, and you definitely need to make sure it's in good working condition. How often do I inspect? This is kind of a loaded question depending on time of year. The most important thing to consider when you want to go in for a hive inspection is the weather. It has to be above 55 degrees, so good flying weather for the bees, no rain, minimal wind. Too windy, the bees are having a hard time flying and they're not going to be in a really great mood. So probably try to find a time that it's not super windy. You don't want rain getting in the hive boxes, especially up here in Oregon. Rain is a major problem. Moisture is a major problem. You don't want to introduce any additional moisture into the hive when you're inspecting. So weather aside, if you've got perfect conditions, how often do you go in? Once every 14 days is a general rule of thumb. Get you into a good routine this way. And the most important thing about every 14 days is it takes a queen bee 16 days to hatch from an egg. So if you miss a queen cup one inspection, you'll just barely get it the next. So this helps to control swarming. If you have queen cells actually emerging in your hive, 60% of your population and the old queen goes away. And you have a month before the new queen, if she makes it that far. goes out and hatches and breeds and comes back and begins laying. So this is a major interruption if you allow your hive to swarm and you don't plan it. If your hive does swarm and you don't want to wait a whole month to actually have broods start coming around again, you can purchase a mated queen. And once you've introduced that mated queen, she should release within about 3 days if you do your slow release properly, and she should begin laying immediately. So instead of a full month-long process to get your new queen to lay, it'll be a 3-day process if you buy the mated queen. Question?
So you leave the cap in with the queen and the bees eat her out, you don't release her right away.
The idea is if your hive is queenless, they'll know pretty quickly, but they won't immediately accept the first queen who walks in. So when you install a queen cage into a colony, you will install a sugar plug, which usually takes the bees about 3 days to eat away. And that allows her pheromones to spread throughout the colony. So everybody knows, hey, this is the new queen, don't kill her. Yes, exactly. So her rule is established before she leaves the cage.
Makes sense.
When you go into the hive to do your hive inspection, what are you looking for? You're looking for resource availability. Before you even go into the hive, it's a good idea to just heft the hive from the back. See if you can lift it, see if it's really heavy, see if it's light. Not necessarily is it heavy or is it light, but is it heavier or lighter? So every 2 weeks, you're kind of getting the feel like, oh, my hive is way heavier than it was. That's a good sign. Hey, it's way lighter. I should probably feed. So pay attention to the weight of the hive as you're going in.
And you're saying you should probably feed because it's not as heavy, because they're not making the honey because they don't have enough to forage to produce.
Yes.
Is that the rationale?
If your hive is becoming lighter and lighter, they're consuming their food stores.
They're consuming
And
them.
if you
Gotcha.
want to harvest your honey, you want them to be increasing their food stores, and that's
Gotcha.
when you're feeding. Usually you're feeding in early spring, right up until right around now in June.
Okay.
And then you take the feed off for the honey season. They're bringing in enough that they're actually adding quite a bit of resources. They're adding to your honey box too.
Yes.
And then once you harvest, you've taken a lot of honey off and you start feeding them really heavily again to build those resources back up for winter.
Thank you.
Swarming potential is another thing you're looking for. You always want to make sure you're getting all of those queen cells out of there. Typically your swarm cells are going to be on the bottoms of the frame. So if you look at the top bar, the side bars, the bottom bar is where you're going to be looking for your swarm cells typically. It's not super uncommon for them to have 1 or 2 on the face of the frame as well. But if you're seeing 10 or 15 queen cells on the side instead of on the bottom, then those are more likely supersedure cells and you actually have a queen problem. We'll get into that a little bit more in a couple slides. Swarming potential population is another thing to look at. Is there enough bees? Is there too many bees? If you have a super packed colony, you may actually have to make a split and make 2 colonies. Harvest potential, are honey frames full and capped? If you pull out a frame and half of it is uncapped, chances are that honey is not cured. It has a moisture content that is too high. And if you spin that honey, it's not shelf stable. It could go bad. If all of your honey frames are capped, like in the photo up here, you see the one here in the center. This is a frame that's completely ready for harvest. Those are shelf stable and their moisture content is somewhere between, I think, 12 and 18%. Versus when it comes in, it's closer to about 98% moisture.
So honey can go, if you harvest honey that's not capped, if you ate it right away, it'd be okay.
Yeah.
But it's when you say shelf stable, it won't last forever. And that will make you sick, and how do you know honey's bad?
You know honey is bad when it starts to ferment. So you'll see bubbles in it and it'll smell kind of sour.
Okay,
It starts kind of turning into kind of like mead.
would it make us sick?
Wouldn't necessarily make you sick, but the bees won't eat it and it's not really all that tasty.
Okay, so I would know.
You would know.
Okay.
And it's super liquidy. A shake test is something that you can do when you honey harvest too. If you've got like 2 or 3 cells and you're like, I don't know, is it quite ready? You take your frame and you shake it, and if a whole bunch of moisture comes down, then it's not ready.
Oh, yeah, so.
If it stays in the frame,
I
it's
think we
cured.
got some honey that was a little too sugary a little too
Mhm.
watery, was almost like sugar, like they had been feeding or something, I don't know. but that would be not ready, that would be shelf stable. Okay, all right, gotcha, thank you.
You're welcome. You can use refractometers to test it too, but I just like using the shake test. The refractometers are usually
great.
upwards of about $100. Where are we?
So I hear what you're saying is if you shake it, it shouldn't come out really.
Exactly. If you shake it
Correct.
and nothing comes out,
Well,
chances
no,
are
no,
it's
I know,
actually
no,
cured.
any honey, no honey should come out if you do that,
Yep.
right? Then it would be ready.
Mhm.
Okay, so it's easily come out, it's not ready.
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
You also shouldn't do the shake test right next to your hive in the grass because then you've got all that honey smell and then everybody in the area is like, ooh, that smells good. And you have a bunch of robbing potential.
So where do you do it?
If you're gonna shake it, have like a cardboard thing out there, or just something that you'll take away from the hive.
Okay, good point, thank you.
No smelly things around the hive.
Okay.
We're also looking for queen health. You're looking for good solid brood. You're looking for young larva eggs. You should see a variety of different ages in there. Count your brood frames. How many brood frames are you used to? How many brood frames should you be seeing this time of year? Are you happy with the brood you're seeing this time of year? We're going to go over that a little bit more later too.
Good.
But a good queen should be laying at least a frame a day.
Oh.
Worker health, are your workers active and alert? Do they have a good response? Do you see shriveled wings? Do you see anybody acting funny? If there are moths, beetles, ants, things like that in the hive, you could have a problem because a healthy colony will not allow these things in the hive in their area. There are a couple of things that can be around the hive that aren't necessarily dangerous. Earwigs freak all sorts of beekeepers out, but they'll actually live up in the top box usually, and nobody seems to bother them. Drone health is another thing to look for. Visual inspection of the drones. You can pluck them out of the brood cells. You can pluck them by the wings and just take a look at the underbellies. Varroa mites are pretty typically on the undersides of drones. They want to be on the drones way more than they want to be on any of the workers. So if you want to do a quick inspection, take a quick look at the drones, you can get kind of an idea of where your mite counts are that way as well. I actually have the American Bee Journal over here with the article on drone testing. So if anyone wants to check that out after class, it's a really cool resource. Before you inspect, know your frames. This is just a little bit of vocabulary so you can talk to other beekeepers. The frame hierarchy has each frame with the name, kind of like squares on a chessboard. So your outer frames, which are usually empty, frames 1 and 2. Your intermediate frames 3 and 4 usually have a little bit of brood, a little bit of resources, and then 5 and 5 should be solid brood frames. If you have an 8-frame hive, just remove 5 and 5 and 4 and 4 are your 2 center frames. When you are preparing to inspect the hive, make sure you have all of your tools with you. Not fun to open up a hive and have to go back and reopen it. They usually don't really like that much. So it's important to have a tool chest, a 5-gallon bucket, an extra nuke box, something that you can carry all of your tools around pretty easily. Something that I am absolutely worried about, have a trash bucket around with you. Be it a cardboard box, just throwing stuff in your nuke box, have some kind of container that you don't mind getting sticky to have burr comb and things that you can carry away from the hive. Something of note, as far as this slide, make sure you have extra lighters on hand and make sure you have a lighter attached to your suit. It's really easy to lose lighters, so I actually have a little lighter leash and I clip it to my zipper on my bee suit, so it never really goes too far. Notebooks work better than cell phones. Getting propolis off of cell phones is not fun. Just take my word for it. Frame perch is not necessary, but it does make your life a whole lot easier, especially if you're a clumsy beekeeper and you knock a frame over that you take out of the hive. So that can be handy, but your most important tools, you cannot get into the hive at all if you don't have your hive tool. It's just simply not going to work. You can pry all you want, it's stuck together. So hive tool and smoker are your 2 most important tools when you go into the hive. Inspecting the hive. Before you even get into the hive, you can tell quite a bit just by looking at what the bees are doing on the outside. Your external inspection should just last a couple of minutes. Check out their attitude. Are they happy today? Do they sound off? You can actually hear the attitude of the bees a lot of the times. So pay attention to the difference in sounds. Weather is going to greatly affect their attitude. Like I mentioned earlier, really windy days, they're not going to be so thrilled. Really hot days, they're going to be really active. Cooler days, they may be a little agitated. If bees are bopping you, that's a good sign that you should have your smoker lit 5 minutes ago. They know that if they sting, they have a barbed stinger and they won't make it through. So they really try not to sting you at first. They will come and flick you in the forehead as a warning sign, like, get away from me, get away from me, I'm gonna scare you. So keep in mind that they will bop you before they sting you a lot of the times.
Heat. You said that they don't like it as much in the cooler weather. It's about 55 anyway. So how does it get worse if it's too hot? Do they get more aggressive if it's too hot and you're opening up there?
If it's too
Like,
hot
what's too
and
hot?
they're busy fanning a whole bunch, you see a bunch of bees bearding on the outside of the hive, they're
Yes.
all fanning,
Yeah.
it's probably 100-something degrees. I wouldn't go in at all. I would leave them alone, let them do their thing.
Okay.
They're stressing out trying to cool the hive down.
Okay.
Their brood nest is about 93 degrees, so anything above that is going to start stressing them out. They're going to bringing in a bunch of water. They're going to be fanning, they're going to be cooling. You
Gotcha.
really don't want to interrupt them when they're doing that.
Okay, so what's the average temperature? I mean, you're looking for what do they call it again? The bearding.
Mhm.
That's bearding, right? That's
Yeah.
not swarming. that's-
Bearding's just on the outside of the hive. You can usually tell because they're looking inward and they're all fanning with their
Okay.
wings.
So is there a general rule of thumb for temperature then not to get in, even if you don't see that?
If you don't want to get in your bee suit, don't.
Okay.
You're gonna overheat before you
I
hurt
understand
them
what you're saying.
too.
So there's really no hard fast rules. What you're
Mhm.
telling me. Okay,
Yep, it's all kind of opinion in that
Okay.
matter.
good enough. Thank you.
But if it's over 100 degrees, you throw a bee suit on, you'll overheat in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So beekeeper safety is try not to get into the hive too. It's not fun overheating in a bee suit.
Oh, no.
My mentor Fred Selby tells me all the time, you beekeep up here in a bee suit, you don't know heat.
Yeah.
You beekeep in Chico, you know heat.
No doubt.
So be good to yourself, be good to the bees, don't go out when it's too hot. External survey, are you seeing any fights at the entrance? Robbing behavior is really easy to see. You'll see knots of bees at the entrance. Probably 10 or 15 of them at a time, sometimes brawling in a little ball. You'll see them fighting in the air. It gets nasty when bad robbing starts happening. Yellow jacket activity is usually pretty bad in late fall.
Yeah.
When all the queens have gotten large colonies going and they're sending out all their workers to attack the honeybees and to get basically all the resources. They'll eat the brood, they'll eat the honey, they'll eat the bees themselves. The yellow jackets are no fun. If you're seeing robbing behaviors, there's a variety of things you can do, but we're going to get into that in a different slide as well. Pollen gathering, this is actually really easy to see. Just see how many bees are coming in. What kind of a ratio are you looking at that have full pollen pants on? If you're seeing lots of bees coming in with lots of pollen, that's a really good sign. If you're not seeing that, you might want to start feeding pollen just to be sure that they're bringing enough in. Basically no protein, no brood. So if you want to build your colony, you want to get enough workers out there to bring in enough honey to harvest, you need to have a sufficient amount of protein or pollen. There are a couple different reasons bees can beard. So just because bees are bearding doesn't mean it's super hot. Bees will beard when they swarm, but they'll be looking outwards and you'll kind of tell they're kind of agitated. They're ready to move. Bees facing the hive are focused on cooling, especially if you see them beating their wings.
Okay.
In fall, they do this strange behavior called, washboarding.
Oh, yeah.
So when they washboard, they'll face downwards right in front of the hive. They'll all be spaced at just about right intervals. And they'll just be rocking back and forth, wiping the hive with their proboscis and their front legs.
Oh.
No one really knows why they do it,
Interesting.
but it's a really interesting phenomenon if you see it. No cause for concern. I've never seen anything bad happen when they do this, but in late summer, watch for it because it's definitely interesting.
Hmm.
This photo here is an artificial bearding scenario. I am fumigating my honey super right here. So the fumigation board forces all the bees out of the honey super because it smells bad. Bees don't like cherry coke apparently. And so they're all bearding on the outside trying to get away from the smell.
Yeah.
So external hive inspection aside, opening up. You don't ever want to work from the entrance. The bees have a definite bee line and they're kind of OCD about their bee line. You don't want to interfere with their flight path. So inspect from the side, inspect from behind, just leave the entrance alone. Let them do their thing and don't bother them any more than you need to. It's good to announce your presence by smoking the entrance lightly, 1 or 2 good puffs. The photo here has probably got a little bit too much smoke. I don't see very much flight going on here. I see a lot of bees that are pretty calm on top. But sometimes the smoker does what smoker does, so that's okay. Question?
I've got a hard time keeping that smoker lit,
Mhm.
and I've tried several different fuels. But I'm just not sure what you would recommend. What do you think is the best smoke medium put in there? How do you keep that
Everybody
smoke?
has a different opinion on what smoker fuel to use. Lots of different things will work, but the best thing you can do is to get your smoker lit before you get to the hive. Wait until it starts really flaring up. You don't want it flaring up when you're in the hive, but you do want to get some coals going. So let that fire go for a minute and then kind of shake it a little bit. So you've got some coals in there, you've got a lot of that fuel burned down. Put some more fuel in there and it'll slowly light. And then by the time you get over to the hive, you should feel cool smoke. If you have an ungloved hand, just put your hand over the top of the smoke. It should not be hot. Hot smoke will aggravate the bees, cool smoke will control the bees. But as far as smoker medium, my favorite is burlap. Just coffee sack burlap, any kind of burlap will work as long as it hasn't been treated in any way.
So you actually leave that top open, let it burn for a while. Maybe I'm kind of being cheap with what I'm burning in there, you know?
It depends on the
Could be
weather
melting.
too.
Mhm.
It was, I think 2 years ago now, when we had that crazy firestorm going on. The smoke was so thick, I could not get my smoker lit to save my life.
Oh,
So
yeah.
depending
Well,
on
did you
weather.
really need a smoker? Yeah.
At that point, I really didn't. They were a little aggravated.
I think so. And good.
Hard to see the
We
sun.
all were, weren't we?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Let's see.
that was horrendous. Hopefully it won't happen again.
So after you announce your entrance by announce your presence by smoking the entrance lightly, every time you remove or replace a piece, you should be smoking them too. The smoke not only deadens their ability to spread their alarm pheromone, but it will also move the bees. So just general puffs are going to prevent the dispersal of the alarm pheromone. More direct, harder puffs are going to actually move the bees. So you want them to get away from the edge, for instance, if you're putting the lid back on, quick, short smoke will move them back in. General smoke is just going to get good coverage for pheromones. And it's definitely good to smoke before you need to, because once the bees are actually in the air, it doesn't really do too much. So stay organized. Make sure that when you're setting your hive equipment down, you have it in a good clean spot and you put it down in such a way that it doesn't all stick together again. Really annoying trying to get a box off of a telescoping cover when you set it directly inside. So always kind of skew your boxes so you get the least amount of touch possible. And it will be much easier to pull that equipment back apart when you go to put the hive back together. If robbing is a concern, you've got a lot of exposed bees here. The telescoping top, the inner cover, the top brood box, and then the hive that you're inspecting are all kind of open. Have an extra telescoping top, have a pillowcase, have just any kind of cover and throw that over the boxes that you're not inspecting. That'll help keep things down if you need to do your inspection and you're having robbing problems. Generally speaking, robbing happens at certain times of day. So if you're seeing heavy robbing, try not to go in at all and wait until the robbing is over. Observe your population size before you delve too deep. How full is the colony? Is this what you expect this time of year? Do you need to do a split? Do you need to add a box? Are they looking really good? Do you need to do nothing? Just kind of pay attention to how many bees are in the hive at one point. A new package in spring has roughly 10,000 bees. By mid to late summer, you're looking at a full size colony that should be 60 to 80,000 bees, depending on certain factors, like queen breed.
They'll fit in 2 brood boxes.
Two
Or
brood
1 or
boxes. Mhm. 2 brood boxes and probably a couple of honey supers at that point. This photo over here, you see white wax on top of frames. This is called whiting. This is a good sign that they're bringing in lots of nectar and they're trying to continue building, but they're running out of room. So this is the bees telling you, hey, put another box on, we're ready to go.
Is that box same as a super then?
This box here, you can't really tell. But if they're running out of room, you should put another box on. Typically speaking, you've got a brood box. The 2 brood boxes stands to the magic number for the bees, and then all the other boxes are supers, and that's gonna be for you.
Okay,
Or for winter, if you wanna leave a honey super on.
okay.
General rule is you're looking at the whiting here and you're looking for 70% of your colony being worked. So if you see 7 frames out of your 10 frame hive with bees on both sides of the frames, incoming resources, you know it's time to put a new box on.
Is there an importance to the one frames being empty, so 1 and 2 generally empty?
That's a good question.
Well,
So
thank you.
the question was, is there an importance to 1 and 2, frames 1 and 2 being empty? It's okay if they're empty, but it's good if they do have those frames filled up, particularly for winter time.
Okay.
You can encourage them to fill frames 1 and 2 by moving resources around. You don't want to ever disturb the brood nest. So probably frames 3, 4, and 5, but you can move frames 2 and 2 into position 1 and 1 and swap those 2 frames. So they're working on 2, they don't want to touch 1, flip them.
Okay,
And then you can encourage them to draw that out.
so you're saying 2 and 1, 1 and 2, but
They're
don't
interchangeable.
mess with 3, 4s and 5s.
Yep. You can always move your resource frames around so that they'll continue to fill them out. Just make sure that your brood nest remains undisturbed.
Okay.
When you are creating workspace in your hive, it's important to not just start willy-nilly pulling frames, because that's how you squish bees, get alarm pheromone, and then suddenly they're all after you. So you want to remove at least 1 frame, up to about 3 frames to keep everything organized, so that you have plenty of room to work in the hive without rolling the bees or squishing them. Most important thing, if you are using a frame perch, like the one in the photo here in the center, when you're pulling your frames out, it doesn't matter if it's frame 1 and it's completely empty, it's frame 2 and it's got a little bit of comb on it. Just really inspect those frames and make sure the queen's not on there. She shouldn't be. She should be in the middle of the brood nest laying. Every now and then she takes a weird vacation and it never fails. When I don't inspect those frames, she's on them. So she will surprise you. Just double check that the queen's not on those frames when you move them out.
She's getting a pedicure.
Exactly. She's having a little vacation. Moving frames during inspection. Like I said before, you don't want to disturb the brood nest. You want to keep those frames in specific positions. You want to keep them facing the correct direction and in the same spot that they were in.
That being said, what I'm hearing you say is, in order to know if there's brood there, aren't you gonna inspect it?
You are going to inspect the frames. You're just going to put them back exactly where you found them.
Oh, okay, all right, so you can lift them up,
Oh, yeah.
but you're just, what I'm hearing you say now is you're not moving them. I mean, you're moving them, but you're
I
not,
can move them around as long as I replace them exactly where I found them.
I hear what you're saying. Move and move are 2 different, or is the same word that you're saying, don't move them into a different position. You're keeping them.
Yep.
Put them back in the same position they were. Okay, gotcha.
It's kind of hard to see when you're inspecting the frames and get kind of a 3-dimensional image, but your brood frames should be in a sphere. You have a sphere of brood. So when you're lifting a frame, you'll see oh, there's a little piece of comb here, there's a little piece of comb here, as you get a little bit to the center, and it gets larger and larger as you get to the middle of the sphere.
Okay.
So you want to keep the sphere as a sphere. If you've got weird stuff popping off the sides of that sphere, they're not going to be as easily temperature controlled, and it's going to be harder for the workers to take care of the brood.
Okay.
So as long as it stays a sphere instead of this weird shape, then we're in good shape.
Awesome.
It's good to inspect all of your frames. If you have time to do it and your bees are in a good mood, inspect all of your frames. Because bees will always surprise you. They'll put a weird queen cell in a spot you didn't expect. Suddenly you've got a swarm on your hands. So just take a quick peek, make sure that you're getting all of your queen cells. You look at all your frames, you've got all the weird burr comb and things off of the sides. But you don't want to be in there for too long. So because you've got once every 14 days that you're going in, if you miss a single queen cell, it's not the end of the world. You can get it next time. If you have to do a half and half inspection, that's something that you can do if you're running short on time or something.
So that's too much time.
It depends on the mood of your bees, and it depends on the weather.
Okay.
You don't want to be into your hive too long, because then the bees will start getting aggravated. They'll start thinking, hey, something's wrong here. If you're in there way too long, you leave the lid off for an hour or two, go in, have some tea, they might abscond.
Mhm.
But if you're working them and they all look like they're doing their thing, they're undisturbed, they're continuing to clean cells and do this and that and the other, then you're all right. They'll let you know when you've been in too long.
Nobody really doesn't have tea and leaves it off, I don't know.
I hope not.
Oh, no.
I've seen some interesting pictures though, people who have left the frames out, all sorts of weird things.
Okay.
It's beautiful when they draw their own comb, but it's not practical at all. If you really need to go in and do your inspection, you haven't done it in too long, but you've only got a couple minutes before you're headed to work or something. You can clamshell your hive. The most likely place that your queen cells are going to be are on the bottoms of the frames. So this little drawing that I made up here, pop your brood box up so you can see all the bottoms of the frames all at once.
Oh,
And this is an effective way of knowing, are you going to have to go hunting for more?
Mhm.
This doesn't mean you've gotten all of the queen cells. It just means you're seeing them work or not. Frame age and functionality. The color of the wax can indicate its age and its use. So depending on what you're seeing, it'll tell you something different about the frame. The photo on the right here, you're looking at kind of old dark comb. This is used for the brood nest. It is heavily used. Bees are walking back and forth on it. The wax has become kind of dirty. It's still perfectly functional. It just means that this has been a heavily used brood area. You know that a brood frame is no good anymore, not when it's black, but when it is misshapen or shallow. If the queen can't physically lay an egg in a cell because there's no depth to it, then there's no point in keeping that around. But this frame that you see here is perfectly functional and can be used for quite a while. The center frame here is some fairly new wax, but it's kind of yellowed. They've been using it for a while. They've been storing resources in here. This is a honey and a pollen frame here. And then the frame all the way over here on the left is beautiful, brand new wax. They've drawn this probably a few days ago.
Almost it's fake, like it's just the
Yeah.
brand name.
It's
Somebody
gorgeous.
just put a frame in, period.
But they are actually filling this with honey, so you know that it's full depth. Well,
Is
not
that the
necessarily.
marked queen then?
Yes, this is the marked queen right here.
But yeah.
So outer frames, looking at the frame hierarchy, we're looking at 1 and 2 here generally. These should be resource frames and expansion frames. A lot of the time they're empty. It's fine if they're empty for a while, but you eventually do want them to get filled up.
Okay.
These should be mostly honey and nectar or a mix. Sometimes you do get brood out here. It's not the greatest thing in the world, and usually what I do is if I've got brood out here, it's going to be more difficult for the colony to thermoregulate. So you kind of want to press the entire brood nest over. As long as you're keeping that sphere intact, you can move the sphere more to the center of the box. So you can put a resource frame in position 1, scoot the entire brood nest over, and that's fine. Honey frames are quite a bit heavier than pollen or brood frames, so you can tell just by lifting it before you even look at it. Oh man, that's honey. A single deep frame full of honey can be 10 pounds at least.
Don't break your back.
Exactly, be really careful with your back. Your intermediate frames are kind of a mixed bag. They should have a rainbow of all different things. You should have honey on the outsides, a little band of pollen if everything looks good, and then this is the outer part of your brood sphere. So this is going to be kind of small right before the sphere expands in the center.
Pretty.
And you see that there are a couple of empty cells here. That's not uncommon, especially for this area. You've got a lot of capped brood, and this isn't a spotty brood pattern. This is simply brood emerging. So this was a complete solid wall of brood, but they're just hatching. Your center frame should be almost exclusively brood. There can be a little band on the outsides of pollen or nectar or whatnot, but most of this should be the center of your brood sphere. You should see several stages of brood here. You should see capped brood, you should see young larvae, you should see eggs. Eggs can be really difficult to spot. Some people say they're about the size of a grain of rice. If you're eating grains of rice that small, I don't know where you're getting it.
You know, I was gonna say, it's the fake ones.
The fake ones,
It's the
yeah.
plastic.
So the easiest way to find eggs is to find your older larvae before they're standing up, and then move over until you see younger and younger and younger larvae. She's got a pattern, so you'll be just able to go back in age until you see tiny little larvae and then finally eggs. So don't just look around like, where's Waldo? Find a pattern and follow it. Worker brood stages. So eggs are 3 days or younger. If you're seeing eggs, you know that the queen has been there within the last 3 days. Everything looks good. You shouldn't have to worry. If you see eggs, you're golden. Young larvae under 10 years old, 10 days old, they can be as small as an egg before the egg dissolves, or they can be so big that they're almost ready to be capped. So they'll be standing up at about 10 days, and then they'll finally be capped over at 10 days until they hatch at 21 days.
Is the capping protecting them?
The capping is protecting them, but they do have their own like chrysalis inside.
Well, why are they capped? I wonder why they wait to cap them at that. Are they just, do they have to feed them? They have
They're
to
feeding
feed them
them.
until they get to a certain age, and
Yep.
that's when they cap them.
Between 1 and 3 days, they're fed exclusively royal jelly.
Okay.
So if you have an egg, that can be turned into a queen at any point. Every bee gets fed royal jelly up until that point. Once they get to be 3-4 days old, they start being fed different diets depending on if they're going to be a queen or if they're going to be a worker. So they get fed bee bread and queen jelly at that point.
Just a real quick question. When you, some of those you can see a double larva. Do
Yes.
the bees get rid of those, or what happens in that?
That's a really good question. I do have a double larva in the center picture here.
Yeah, right there. I see
This
it.
is actually a sign of a brand new queen. She hasn't quite figured out what to do yet.
Oh.
This was probably my most productive queen ever,
Hmm.
but she did occasionally lay a double egg. These cells won't necessarily fit 2 larvae. So chances are what happened here is either one or both of the larvae were removed by the workers.
Oh, so a worker will remove one of them.
But it's not alarming when you see 2. 2 is not a bad thing. If you're seeing 6 or 8, then you know that you have laying workers, you have no actual queen, and you've got major problems. Which is actually a really good transition straight into queen status here. Finding the queen is exciting, it's helpful. Get a picture when you do find her, because it's not going to happen all the time. The most important thing that you can do to know that your queen is there really is to see the eggs. You should see a good pattern of eggs. You should see brood in various stages of development. You know that she's active, she's laying. Everything is good if you're seeing these signs. The queen's been there in the last 3 days, like I said, if you are seeing eggs. If you are having trouble spotting the eggs, even if you see the young larva, try angling the comb so that you can see it a little bit better in the sunlight. The angle does make a big difference. Having black foundation is really handy too. White shows up pretty well on a black surface. So a brand new brood comb, like you see up here in the top photo here, makes it a lot easier to see your eggs. Every couple of years, brood frames will need to be replaced. They'll become shallow, they'll become warped, they'll become just a little bit less useful. So don't replace all of your frames at once, replace one or two here and there until you've got all good frames.
So how do you do that? Do you move them to the outside?
Yes, when you're replacing your frames, you don't want to take out a whole frame of brood and throw that away because you're wasting a lot of resources. So a frame that you want to mark for removal, you do put to position 1 on either side, and then they'll eventually kind of stop using that for more important resources, and you can remove that frame once it's more or less empty. That's a really good question. Oh, we just talked about this. Sometimes new queens can lay 2 eggs. And I do have a photo here of laying workers. I ran into this 2 or 3 years ago now. I was actually able to fix this problem because I caught it pretty quickly. You can do a variety of things to get rid of them, but usually when bees are laying, they are too fat to fly. So what I did is there was only one frame where they were actually laying these multiple eggs. I took that one frame and I shook it probably 50, 60 feet away from the hive, so that everybody who wasn't a laying worker could fly back and they knew where the hive was, but the laying workers were stuck out there. Requeened the hive and everything was fine.
What happened to those bees that were shook out there?
They went out there and did their thing.
All right. So
Basically, they didn't come back to the colony.
Okay.
So if you requeen the hive, will that new queen go around and kill those laying workers, or what happens to them?
Not necessarily. Sometimes it works out that way, sometimes it doesn't. The queen pheromone needs to spread throughout the hive. So you want to have her in her queen cage for 3 days before she's released so her pheromones can spread. If the laying workers are all still in there, there may be a dispute as to who is the real queen. And if they're dispersing pheromones as well, it might not work out so well. That's why I take as many of the brood frames as I can and I shake them in a different spot so that removes any pheromone they may be dispersing.
So it sounds like you're shifting the brood frames as you're requeening.
I'm not shifting the brood frames, I'm shaking them. So I'm taking a brood frame that has laying workers on it, and I'm taking that frame, shaking the bees off of it,
Okay,
and then I'm replacing that frame.
okay. And that's when you're introducing a new
Mhm.
queen.
But with laying workers, usually they've been queenless for quite a while. So it may or may not work. If they're hopelessly queenless, they may not accept any queen.
Okay.
So there's really never a guarantee when you have laying workers whether or not you can requeen. I've seen it work and I've seen it fail. Inspecting brood frames to prevent swarming. Swarming is a natural process. It's not a bad thing. It usually means that you have a really healthy colony when they swarm. Instead of the queen laying individual eggs, she is effectively splitting the colony in 2 and reproducing at a colony level, which is really cool when you think about it, but not so cool when they end up in your neighbor's yard. Especially when it happens late in the season, you're losing about 60% of your colony with your old queen. So if you're having a swarm late in the season, this can cause some problems for overwintering. You need to get that requeen really fast. You need to just throw a whole bunch of food on that colony to try and keep it up. In springtime, usually they'll build up just fine. But if they swarm after about June, you may end up with some problems. When a colony swarms, it can swarm multiple times. Sorry. When a colony swarms, it can produce many virgin queens and queen cups. Normally what happens is you will have your virgin queens hatch, and the very first one to hatch will go around and kill all of the others. So she will be the new dominant queen. Every now and then you have 2 queen bees hatch at the same time, and they'll have a standoff. If you have if you have no apparent winner, you'll actually wind up with 2 queens in the colony. So there are instances of having 2 queens. It's not completely unheard of, but it poses some interesting issues as far as population and having too much brood at one point.
Good question.
Yeah.
When they swarm, a queen is hatched already in the other hive?
When they swarm, you've got hatched queen cells. The
Gotcha.
queen leaves right as they're about to hatch or right as they hatch.
Gotcha, so in the hive that they swarm from, I should get in there and remove the rest of the queen cells, or it doesn't really matter?
The hive that they have swarmed from, you have the option. You've got virgin queens in there once they've swarmed. You can let them do their thing. Or you can go in there and you can hunt them down and get rid of all the queen cells, get rid of any virgin queens that you see, and then requeen with your own queen. And what you're doing there is you are introducing a laying queen within 3 days versus allowing them to requeen themselves, which will take a full month to actually
Like
see
you
to
talked
brood.
about earlier.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it sounds like it might be better to requeen them right away versus just letting them.
It depends on time of year. If it's
Okay.
early spring, there's lots of resources, there's lots of time.
Okay.
You can let them requeen themselves and there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay. But if
But,
it was winter or fall, it
Mhm.
might not, they don't have enough time.
and there's no guarantee because when a queen is out on mating flights for 2 weeks, there's all sorts of things that can go wrong. She could get eaten by a bird, she could be improperly mated, maybe the drones aren't out, maybe it's rainy for 2 weeks. There's a lot of things that can go wrong when you allow them to requeen themselves.
Okay.
In a perfect world, everything's fine. But if you have a single colony and you really want it to survive, getting a mated queen is probably the better route to go.
Do you guys keep mated queens here just through the summer, or?
We do keep mated queens here basically from the time the first packages arrive, which is sometime in April, until usually around September.
That's good to know.
Swarm prevention techniques. So keeping up your regular inspections once every 14 days and scraping away queen cups and swarm cells will help prevent your colony from swarming. If they don't have a bunch of queens that they're rearing, they're like, oh, well, we still need to rear queens, we gotta wait. So you can kind of keep them in the hive by preventing them from requeening themselves. They don't want to leave a hive that's going to fail because then they're not reproducing at the colony level. They're just abandoning their sisters. They really want to have 2 entities. There's still one colony. They don't want one side to fail. So if there's no queens, they're going to stick around. If you're starting to see swarming activity and you just keep cutting the queen cups off, you just keep cutting the queen cups off, they're going to continue making those queen cups until something happens. They need more space, they need to swarm. If they're really got their heart set on swarming, you can do what's called a split. And essentially what you're doing is you're swarming for them. You are taking their swarm and you are putting it in a controlled environment. So you will take your colony and you'll put it in a different location. You'll fool them into thinking they've swarmed and you've got a second colony. There are lots of different ways of doing this. The easiest way is just a walk away split. So if you find your queen in a colony that's trying to swarm, you want the old queen in a new location. That way she knows like, oh, cool, I've left my house, I've gotten a new spot. It's more likely to take that way. So you take that box, scoot it into the new position, and then you get a new queen for your old box. When you're doing your split, make sure that you've got your resources split up pretty well too. You want to have brood in both boxes, you want to have resources in both boxes so that they continue to produce new bees and new resources, and they're all happy. Common frame problems. This is another reason why it's important to inspect on a fairly regular basis. If you let these swarm problems go, they will become absolute nightmares. You catch them early, it's usually a really simple fix. Sometimes frames are improperly drawn or damaged. I've got a couple photos in here, some really nasty improperly drawn comb. If you've got side comb, so you've got your foundation here and then you've got comb over and going down, that is a dangerous situation where you could have bees underneath there. You could crush the queen. You really want them to draw on the foundation, not next to it.
So on, that looks like it's on a plastic, center.
Mhm.
That, I mean, we've found a lot of those in our hives with plastic frames, is that just because you didn't get
Sometimes,
them properly waxed or?
sometimes they prefer their own foundation rather than the right cell plastic foundation. So adding some additional wax to that can help. Sometimes they just don't want to draw it outright. And if you scrape that comb away, they'll usually redraw it properly.
Oh,
Doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes you have to just remove the frame and put something else in that position and completely get all the wax all off of it.
You just shake the bees off.
Shake the bees off and then remove the burr comb. But this is a really interesting set of cross comb right here. I don't usually see this. This has been let go for quite a while. We've got brood in here, we've got honey in here. It was a huge mess to clean up.
Yeah, no doubt.
so when you pull that apart, sometimes you find these larvae that are mostly fully formed.
Mhm.
Do the nurse bees rescue those and put them in?
The nurse bees, I don't think will actually rescue any of the brood that you've pulled out. They will do one of two things. They will either consume it because they are a good source of protein, or they will take it and remove it from the hive.
Oh,
So basically clean it out. They're not going to survive if you take them out of the cells like that. They can move eggs, but it's kind of debatable whether or not they do. But they can't move brood once they're that developed.
Sounds like they're just a good meal.
In times of starvation, if there's brood, they'll actually start to cannibalize their own brood.
Yeah.
Which is really a nasty situation, and usually you can't get the colony to recover once they've started doing that.
Just real quick.
Mhm.
Bottom left, you just scrape out,
Yep. The
Yeah.
comb.
shake the bees off, scrape, get rid of it all.
Mhm.
The yellow,
Mhm.
Usually with a frame this bad, this doesn't have a plastic foundation, it has a wax foundation.
Mhm.
You could try to scrape that frame, but it'd be a lot easier just to scrap the whole thing and get a new one at this point. If
you're
you,
saying take that frame out and just put another frame in?
yes, I would just throw this frame completely away.
Or-
If you had plastic, you could scrape it down to the plastic and have them rebuild it.
So that being said, if that's the middle, if that's a middle frame
Mhm.
of 3, 4, or 5. You would want to.
If this is a middle frame and it does have brood on it that you don't want to get rid of, you can move it to the outside of the brood nest.
Yeah,
So if you're looking at frame 3 and frame 3's got a little bit of brood on it, put that position in frame 2.
okay,
So it's still touching the brood nest, but it's eventually not going to be used for brood. Once it hatches out, the queen won't necessarily lay eggs in it again, and then you can move it out to position 1 and
but
get
you
rid of
got
it.
a new frame though, because you're taking, you're replacing with a new frame, do you put that new frame in 1 and 2 and put?
You scoot the brood nest together, and then you
Yes.
put the new frame on the outside of the
Yeah,
brood
so
nest. So
always
it
a
could
new
be,
frame usually
Mhm.
goes in 1 and 2.
yes.
Anytime you introduce a new frame that has nothing on it, 1 and 2,
Mhm.
and you scoot them together.
If it's a drawn comb already, you want to put it probably in position 3,
Okay.
because then it's close to the brood nest, the queen can immediately utilize it. And you're
saying
not
if the
putting a
frame that
resource
you're
frame.
replacing this one with has something on it, because we keep some of those.
Mhm.
That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, okay, so say that one more time, if the frame already has drawn stuff on it, then you can put it in there. Okay,
Mhm.
but if it's completely empty new one,
If it's a completely empty new one, make sure it's on the outside of the brood nest.
gotcha. So much to know.
Yes. You just don't want your queen becoming honey bound is the thing.
So become
Honey bound.
honey bound, okay.
If you got all your resource frames and you crowd it into the brood nest,
Mhm.
if they're not consuming that honey, it's just sitting there.
Yeah.
And the queen can't lay in a frame full of resources, so
Oh,
she kind
gotcha.
of gets locked out.
Okay.
Drone comb. Should you have it? Should you not?
Hmm.
The general consensus is if it's drone, get rid of it. Honeybees usually have somewhere around 10% drone in the active season. So you'll start seeing drones somewhere in springtime when you start seeing swarms appear as well. Honeybees do need some drone. So a couple of drones is not going to make or break anything. But drones are the major breeding ground for varroa mites, which is the #1 predator to your honeybees. So the more drone you can get rid of, the more varroa mites you're going to be controlling. There are special drone frames that beekeepers will use. They're always green. They have larger cell structures in their foundation. So it will only have drone brood in it. The idea with the drone comb here is you allow the queen to fill this completely out. Once they're capped, you remove that. And you're effectively removing, I think it's a couple of thousand drones at one time. You cannot let them hatch because a varroa mite can reproduce up to 3 times on a drone. That's a lot of varroa mites in the full frame of drone. So you remove this, freeze it for 3 days, take your uncapping scratcher and remove all the drones and then put this back in.
So that's a special frame.
This is a special frame.
And
If you've got deep boxes, you don't necessarily need a special frame. You can put a Western size frame into a deep box and they'll usually draw a bunch of burr comb at the bottom and that's going to be almost exclusively drone. So you can make your own like that too.
oh. So when is this done? In the spring?
In the spring is when they really start pumping out
Like when we
drones.
came out to do ours and we got rid of all the drones.
Yes.
That was a drone comb that was very heavy.
Mhm.
Get rid of them because you only need a few.
You really don't need any in your colony. You need others in other colonies so that queens can still be mated, but you don't really want any drones in your colony. If I see 2 or 3 drones on a frame, I'll just pop them with my hive tool and that will make the workers remove those, get them out of the hive. Basically, they're cleaning out. These drone frames can be dangerous though, because if you screw up the timing a little bit, you're creating a varroa mite factory instead of controlling. So if you let them hatch out, it's worse than not having drone frame in there at all. Let's see. Oh, positioning for drone frame. Drone frame positioning should be on the outside of the brood nest. So they don't need to thermoregulate it as hard. It's not quite as warm as the other brood. If you have brood in frames 5, 5, 4, 4, and 3, 3, your drone comb should go in 2 or 3. So you want it on the outside of the brood nest, still touching the brood nest, but on the outside of it. The reason why you want to freeze your drone comb before you remove it, you'll find out if you ever try to do it without freezing it, but it's not fun. They kind of.
You're saying you freeze it before you
Mhm.
dismantle or do whatever scrape
Yep.
or kill.
Before you scrape it out.
That's what you did, it's a mess.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It's a disgusting mess if
Yeah.
you just try and get rid of this when it's not frozen.
kind of like blowing your nose without a Kleenex.
Even worse. Yep, it's worse.
Yeah.
Seasonal feeding. So these are general guidelines. They can be changed a little bit depending on circumstances in the hive, but fat bees are happy bees. Well-fed bees will produce more workers, which will bring in more resources, which will put more honey in your cabinets and will pollinate your crops a lot more effectively. The only time I really stop feeding sugar syrup is during the honey flow, because I don't want to contaminate my honey with the feed that I'm giving them. So in springtime, basically as soon as the weather warms up, it stops being so wet. That's when I start my sugar feed. You start with a 1-to-1 ratio of sugar to water. And what this does is it tells the bees, hey, it's springtime. There's a light nectar flow going. We can start building comb. We can start rearing brood, can just really get kickstarted to spring. They won't necessarily store this sugar syrup. So it's important to know if they're not eating it, they're not eating it. If it's going away, they are absolutely consuming it. They're not storing your 1-to-1. In late spring, you can continue to feed a 1-to-1 sugar syrup. You can also feed a 2-to-1 sugar syrup. So a really, really heavy sugar syrup. This is if you're trying to put on extra weight, you're trying to get them to really fill out that second brood box before the honey season starts off. The 2-to-1 sugar to water ratio is going to get them to store inside the cells. which is why it's really important you don't feed this during the honey flow, because then you're gonna wind up with sugar syrup in your honey boxes. Nobody wants to just eat sugar syrup.
So it looks like you always keep pollen patty in the.
Yes.
in the-
I always keep pollen patty in my hives. Depending on time of year, I'll use a different ratio of pollen patty. Your typical in-season protein patties are about 18% protein, which encourages your queen to lay. If she has enough protein, she's laying. She's basically forced to. During winter, you should have a broodless period where your colony can decrease the temperature, decrease the amount of resources it's consuming, and just keep going through winter. So you don't want them to have a brood during winter. You have a 4% protein. So they're still getting all the nutrients they need, but the queen is not producing brood at that point. Also important to note that if you are feeding during winter, as far as sugars are concerned, they can't metabolize all that extra moisture. It's too wet, it's too cold, they can't really get out of the hive. So dry granulated sugar sprinkled over the tops of the frames, like in photos here, is completely acceptable. Fondant is probably even better for them, as long as you don't boil anything. You should never be boiling your sugar water, never boil your fondant. It'll set up just fine.
But you can use warm water to kind of help dissolve the sugar.
Warm water is completely fine, just don't boil it.
Yeah.
There's a chemical change that happens when it boils.
Yeah.
And it takes on similar traits to formaldehyde, and it does a whole lot more harm than good. Pests and diseases. This is going to be kind of the chunky portion right here. Some things are really easy to spot. Some things are just indicators that you have other problems. So it's important to know what you're looking at and what you should be looking for when you see it. Robbing is a big one. It's easy to spot. It's usually pretty easy to handle as well. Strong, healthy colony can protect itself from most sources. But honestly, you really want to protect them from everything because you're a beekeeper, not a beehaver. You want to always keep your apiary free of discarded wax, propolis, honey, larva, anything smelly. You don't want to be on the outside of the hive. You want to take that away and dispose of it with you. Robbing pests come in all shapes and sizes, so even if you don't see it here, it doesn't mean that they're not a threat to honeybees, doesn't mean it is a threat to honeybees either. But common threats to honeybees that you're going to be experiencing. You will be seeing western yellow jacket wasps. It's best to trap the queens in April. I've got some samples over here on the table that you can see of queens and workers, the differences there. Once you start seeing workers in fall, there's really not much you can do as far as killing them, other than tracking down their entire ground nest, which can be a huge problem. But if you ask Dan Scalard, he'd be happy to come out and take care of those for you usually.
Who?
Dan Scalard,
Oh,
he's the Oregon wasp guy.
okay. You got a number for him, eh?
I do have a
He's
number
good
for
at it.
him.
He's good at it.
Raiding honeybees from other hives can also be robbing pests. Honeybees sense that one colony is much stronger than the other. They may try and forage from their neighboring hive. So watch out for that as well. Look at the entrance of the hive. You can always tell when there's scuffles at the entrance that robbing is happening. Small hive beetles are something that I've seen once or twice around here, but they are very uncommon in this area. Usually we're too moist of a climate for them. So it's important to know that they exist, but the chances of you actually having them in your colony are pretty low. Skunks, on the other hand, are quite common, and they have a serious affinity for honeybees. They will go to the outside of your hive at night, and they'll start scratching at the entrance to invoke a response from the honeybees. And once the honeybees start filing out to defend, they just open their mouths. That's pretty much it. They can just decimate a colony in about 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So if you're seeing your entrance examinations, like, oh, they're really agitated, they're just all around the front, they're going around like annoyed, angered, feared, you know that something's kind of up. Look for scratches at the entrance. You'll be able to see the scratch marks too.
I was gonna say, you should be seeing
Yes.
scratches, okay. All right.
I actually had
Interesting.
someone that I went out for a consult for, she had a problem with the skunk. She had a game cam on it. She's like, yep, there's definitely a skunk out there. And what she did is she used tack boards, like for carpet, and she laid a bunch of tack boards out in front of the entrance. And skunks have got really sensitive paws.
Yeah.
So as soon as it hit that tack board, that sent it packing.
Ooh.
Now, have you heard of possums doing the same thing? Cause
I actually have had a possum in my backyard before, and I watched it, and I think it goes around and it will pick up the dead bees from the ground, but I've never seen it actually harm my hive in any way.
Cause I heard Puget Sound beekeeper, president or whatever she was, say that a possum will knock at the hive to get bees to come out,
Mhm.
so.
I've
I was
never
just curious.
seen them doing it. I watched mine for about 2 months, and then I realized it's just not gonna do anything. I got bored after a while.
So, God,
So
it's good
it's-
to observe it
yeah.
then before you go hurting something.
It's possible for them to start eating them, but I've never had a problem with them.
No.
Yeah, there you go. To a certain degree, huh?
Bears, there's really not much you can do. Bear wants your hive, bear gets your hive, bottom line. There are certain preventative measures you can take. You can try hot wire. It could kind of help, but if a bear wants your hive, that's really it. You need to put your hive in a location where the bear doesn't know it
Hot
is.
water?
Hot wire.
Electric.
Oh, hot.
If it hits the
wire,
nose,
sorry.
then it's effective.
I thought you said hot water. I was like, what is hot water? My hearing, sorry.
No worries, mine too. Wax moths are usually only a problem in winter, same with mice and ants. Healthy active colony should be able to keep wax moths at bay, but in wintertime, when they're all clustered up, they're not moving around too much. The wax moths on the outsides of the cluster could become a problem. Same with mice and ants. So something to think about. Non-threatening critters in a honeybee hive. I have seen earwigs, not a problem at all. They seem to live side by side. Thrips, the same tiny little jumping bugs that you see on your rosebuds that do all that damage to the rosebuds, don't seem to have any sort of damage to the hive, but I've actually seen them jumping around before. Not sure what they're doing in there, but the bees do not seem to mind at all. Large spiders are a lot more of a threat to me than to bees. I love things with 6 legs, but I draw the line at 8. What to do if my colony is being robbed? Wasps or bees from another colony, there's a couple things you can do. You can reduce your main entrance so that the space is really small, about ½ an inch. And then 1 or 2 guard bees can take care of the entire hive. They can defend it from all sorts of different robbers. So this is really helpful. Plug any additional entrances. If you've got honey supers on, usually the honey super will have a small hole, an extra entrance for them. You can plug that so that they've only got 1 entrance and they can more easily defend. In really extreme cases, you see things just falling out of the air in fights. You can use a hose or a sprinkler. And just like rain falling on a hive, you don't want to spray inside the hive, but you want to spray all around it. And that will basically prevent flight and break up the fight. Some indicator diseases such as deformed wing virus are closely associated with other problems and can point you towards it. So if you start seeing deformed wing virus, you know that you've got a bad mite problem and you really need to get on top of your treatment. Tracheal mites aren't so much of a problem anymore because the same treatments that will curb your tracheal mite problem will also treat your varroa mites. So we're focusing on varroa mites and we're also tackling the tracheal mites. One moment here. Some diseases can be treated with chemical or cultural controls. Others are more devastating and require disposal or actually incineration of affected equipment. American foul brood is the only one where you actually have to burn your equipment. Chances are you probably won't see it, but European foul brood is more of a problem at the moment. It's just more common. As with many organisms, stress colonies are more subject to infection. So if you see one problem, you'll probably see a host of problems. This gets a little bit confusing sometimes, so just try and pick out which problem started it, which problems you do have, and attack the problems you see. Mm-hmm. But if you keep up on your hive inspections, you keep up on your swarm control, you keep up on your feeding, and you keep up on your integrated pest management, you shouldn't be seeing any of these problems. The preventative is so much better than trying to fix something that's gone wrong. This has become my least favorite thing because I actually have had to deal with chalk brood quite a bit this year. The wet winter has kept colonies inside cooped up for way too long. Chalk brood is something that they can fix themselves pretty easily, but it's real nasty when you come in the middle of it. American foul brood. This is the most destructive brood disease. Most colonies cannot make it out of this. If you are in a scenario where you have multiple colonies, you have one colony affected with AFB, the most effective thing to do is just to get rid of that colony, burn the equipment, and forget that hive ever existed. There are a couple of different things that you can do to distinguish American foul brood from the less harmful European foul brood. The ropey test is probably the easiest way to do this. You can take a toothpick or a paper clip or just any small stick. Stick it inside the affected brood, stir it up to the point where it's basically a larval soup, and then pull it out. If that larva stretches from the cell out onto your stick about 1 inch, you know that's American foul brood. It's sticky, it's hard for the workers to remove. It's really just a nasty disease. And it has such a pungent odor, you will not be able to forget it. So ropey test is what you're using to distinguish the two foul broods. The European foul brood is less destructive, but still a problem. The workers are able to actually remove the brood, clean the cells in a way that they can't do it with American foul brood. So with European foul brood, you can use things like a terramycin, which is veterinarian prescribed to help treat it. You can re-clean, which allows a brood break, and the brood break allows the workers to clean the cells before new brood is introduced. The smell is similar to American foul brood, but not as intense.
And with the EFB, you don't have to burn up everything.
With
Yeah,
EFB, you
treated.
don't have to burn it. Some people will burn it anyway,
Yeah.
but it's possible that you can have EFB and have the colony actually recover.
Okay. Only if it's treated though, right? So that's a cycle.
Not necessarily.
Okay,
You
so
can
you can
treat
do it
with
some-
terramycin, you can re-clean, you can get clean equipment in there. It's possible for it to recover, but it's not good. You're gonna have some serious losses. You're not gonna come out with a strong colony. So it's probably easier to call it quits and get new stuff with the European foul brood as well.
Yeah.
A lot of people do burn, even though it's not 100% necessary to burn.
So with the American foul brood, you kill all the bees that are in the hive?
Yes, you killed the bees as well.
Everything gets fired up,
Everything goes.
you know, the boxes, not the tool.
The boxes, the
equipment, like-
frames, the tools can be sanitized.
Okay. Tools
But
can
the
be-
hive box, the bees, everything, if it's American foul brood, everything's destroyed.
Yeah.
Let's see, we had mentioned deformed wing virus already. Deformed wing virus is pretty easy to spot usually, especially in bad cases. You'll see bees hanging around the entrance. And with deformed wings, they can't fly, so they're crawling, just aimlessly walking back and forth.
Yeah.
You'll see it on frames once in a while too, but you know if you're seeing this, you've got a problem. Nosema and dysentery are sometimes quite a bit more difficult to diagnose because it happens when you're not doing regular hive inspections. In the winter time, you're off doing other things, the bees are stuck inside and they can't go out and use the bathroom, and moisture causes issues. When you open the hive up in spring, you'll see little brown marks on the outside of the hive, and that's the fecal streaking from the dysentery. The best thing you can do if you have a hive with dysentery or nosema, it's really hard to tell the difference unless you actually dissect the bee, whether it's actually nosema or just dysentery. But get the hive as open as possible, remove the mite board, remove the entrance reducer, get good ventilation going through there. And In this photo here, you'll see, there's a rain cover over the top. And it can be super simple, it can be, in depth, as long as they've got a flight zone, probably about 18 inches in front of the entrance. They can take cleansing flights throughout the winter, so they don't have to hold it the whole time.
So really in the valley, we should have that period.
It
Yeah.
rains enough that it's good to have
Yeah.
a rain cover over the
Yeah.
top. Also provides some shade in the
Yeah.
summertime. Requeening can help with almost any disease because you're causing a brood break. You're allowing the workers who've been stressed to the point that they can't get all of their duties done to really catch up on all of their work. And then once the new brood starts coming in, the queen's laying into now clean cells and everything kind of works itself out. So you're having issues, you're having a stress colony, requeening can a lot of the time fix it. So a couple things here on Varroa destructor. This is, Varroa destructor sounds made up, it's the actual scientific name. So they are the biggest problem for bees currently. There is a new mite incoming, but I haven't heard too much about it yet. It sounds like the new mite is going to be more deadly, so a worse pest. So I think Varroa mites are going to ultimately stay our main focus, but only time will really tell there. Learn to spot your mites, learn to sample your mite populations, and get your integrated pest management cycle started early, because it's a lot easier to curb small numbers of mites than to start with a large number and try to get it down. You can use several different varieties of tests. You can use just a white mite board, like I've got in the photo up here. This doesn't kill any bees. It's super, super easy. It's not as accurate as some other tests, but it's better than nothing. You can use drone testing, like the article by Zach Lamas in American Bee Journal that I've got over here on the table. This takes quite a bit of time. You're usually testing about 40 drones during your hive inspection. So definitely takes time, but it's something you can do. The alcohol or powdered sugar wash is the most effective way of testing. You will kill somewhere around 300 bees, but ultimately you are telling how many mites are in the hive. You're figuring out exactly where you stand in the mite scenario. And when you think about it, 300 bees really isn't the end of the world. Mid-season, you'll have 300 to 500 bees dying a day just of old age.
Especially in drones. So we don't
Especially,
want them anyway.
yep, in the fall, they're gonna kill all the drones.
Yeah.
Employ a variety of treatment strategies to reduce your mite populations. Temperature is a major constraint on most mite treatments, so pay attention to what time of season it is and what treatment you can use for that season. And try and stay away from chemicals. Things like Apivar are chemical miticides, which mites can build up a resistance to. If you use acids and natural mite treatments like Apiguard, Hopguard, and Formic Pro, they're not going to build up a resistance to that. They're not as strong. So if you've got a nasty mite population and you're in absolute emergency mode, Apivar is the way to go. But if you're doing an integrated pest management system, you should only need these treatments here. I don't have it listed here, but oxalic acid is another option. This is more of an off-season miticide. You would use oxalic acid in the broodless winter months.
And that would avoid resistance as well. Okay.
All of your naturally derived miticides are going to reduce your
Makes sense.
resistances. It's hard to come up with a resistance to an acid. I forgot this point here. When you're looking at your mite board, it can be really hard to pick out these tiny little mites. If we're talking brood is the size of a grain of rice, well, mites are the size of the tip of a pencil, they're smaller. So a good trick with looking at your mites, everything you see on this board that is not a mite is a matte color. It doesn't shine at all. Your varroa mites have shiny shells. So if you shine a flashlight on there, you're looking for a little bit of shine, you'll be more likely to find the varroa mite, which you see in this photo here with its shine on. And this is the top side of the varroa mite. Sometimes they'll be flipped over and you can actually see 8 forward-facing legs.
Oh,
Oh, there we go. This is the bottom side right here. Not the most in focus photo, but it's the
kind of like
best
a
that I can
ladybug
find.
almost upside down
Mhm.
a little bit. Well, not like that.
I'd rather see ladybugs.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
Use a variety of treatment and practices to limit varroa. You can use your mite treatments. You can also use your drone frames. Drone frames are not a treatment. They're simply a method of control. So they should be used in conjunction with your mite medications. Effective monitoring includes hive inspection, mite boards, and phoretic or adult bee sampling. Phoretic mites are simply mites that are on adult bees hitching a ride to somewhere else. Your treatment schedule, these are pretty loose guidelines. It does change from year to year, different weather patterns and the like. You want to treat either after installation of a new hive or as temperature allows for your overwintered colony. The moment you can and the moment you know that they are established and happy in their colony, that's when you want to treat. You've got a brand new nuke, you want to wait 2 or 3 weeks before you treat because you want them to become established in their new hive. Same with if you've got a brand new package, you want to wait a little bit, make sure that they've got resources in there, make sure that they're not going to fly the coop at the first sign of trouble. You don't treat with anything during honey flow. If you've got a honey super on, you don't want to be eating oxalic acid. You don't want to be eating Thymol. I really don't want to have Formic Pro in my system. Actually, on that note, interesting thing. Not agreeing with them, but the FDA has approved the use of Formic Pro with honey supers on. I'm gonna leave it at that. You can do your own research, but I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Let's see, where are we here? Fat bees are healthy bees. So you want to feed your sugar syrup and your protein whenever they need it, as long as it's not during the honey flow. Fit bees are less likely to be afflicted by mites. They're still going to be there. The mites are still going to be a problem, but they are going to be slightly more resistant to things like your deformed wing virus and things that can be contracted by varroa mites if they're happy and healthy and well fed. Supplements such as Pro Health have shown some benefit in some situations. There's not a whole lot of, I guess, proof to go with that, but a lot of people do swear by these additives to the sugar syrup. And I just mentioned this before, but when you're controlling mites, you should be controlling after installation and before your honey flow, after your honey flow, and before the winter cluster forms. Usually I will try and do 2 treatments after honey flow. I will harvest my honey in the last week of July typically, and then I will do a treatment, wait a month, and then do another treatment as weather allows. The varroa mites typically get really bad in the fall because what happens is you have 2 different growth curves. I wish I had the graph on here. But in the springtime, your honeybee population goes up, and then in the fall, it goes down for wintertime. Your varroa mites are going to start to climb as your population grows, and then as your bee population starts going down for winter, your varroa mites are continuing to grow. They don't drop off until quite a bit later, so you can run into problems if you've got dwindling numbers of honeybees and increasing numbers of varroa mites.
Cause they have only one person to go to, a lot on one bee.
And the most common time for bees to perish because of the varroa mites is around that time for that reason.
And you don't leave your supers on like through August.
You can leave your supers on longer. Last year was actually a really late year, and it was probably a good idea to harvest a little bit later. You can get more honey if you wait, but I harvest early because I get some honey still, and then I give them plenty of time to continue to bring resources in for winter. If we end up getting a short season, winter comes too early, they haven't gotten enough resources, they're not going to make it through the winter. I tend to feed just in case, but I want them to have enough resources that they can overwinter themselves.
It really depends on your brood boxes, if they're full.
Mhm.
Keep making honey.
And I like to put my honey super back on, my empty honey super once I've harvested, and let them just fill that completely back up. And I'll leave it on over winter. Some people will overwinter with just your two boxes, your two brood boxes full, and that's completely fine. But you may need to feed really early in the spring. If you leave your honey super on there and it's probably over 70% full, there's not a whole lot of empty space in there. I just leave it on there. And then if they run out of resources, they're in the honey box. And then you have less chances of starvation in spring.
Just pull excluder on. Keep it on, and it'll fill everybody and all.
Yep.
It's a great idea.
And then they feed themselves through the winter and you don't have to go out and open it up as much.
Yeah.
Well, you still do if you can, but.
But usually I only get 2 or 3 opportunities in winter to actually.
Yeah. So that ensures that they have enough food.
That's good.
Yeah, okay.
It does pose a problem for some beekeepers who are doing specific types of honey harvesting.
Yeah.
Because those honey supers are now going to be brood frames.
Um,
And some people don't like that. If you're doing certain types of liquid honey or cut comb honey or something like that. But if you're doing cut comb honey, you want all fresh frames anyway, so you'll be renewing your frames every year. All right, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here, we're getting there. Sorry for droning on so long.
you're doing great. Sorry for all the questions.
The more questions, the better.
But we're here to learn.
Exactly. So learning to read your hive and conducting consistent inspections are going to reduce your losses, increase your understanding, and reduce your frustrations. Try to conduct your regular bi-weekly, once every 14 days inspections. The better you know your bees, the better you can help them. No two colonies are exactly alike. They're kind of like people. Each queen has got their own personality. So make sure you're taking regular notes. You really know your colony. A lot of these issues, not just some of them, affect more than just your own hives. Drift becomes a problem, diseases become a problem, varroa mites are a problem, not just for your hive, but all of the hives in the area. Honeybees can fly up to about 3 miles typically. In a really nasty nectar dearth, they've been known to fly up to 10 miles. So if you've got honeybees within 10 miles, you could be adversely affecting somebody else's hive if you're not treating. I do offer in-hive consultations. We do a single visit for 150, and that's an hour-and-a-half consultation in the hive, doing the hive inspection, working on whatever questions you have, and then email support, phone support, in-store, that sort of thing as well. So definitely an option. Reach out if you'd like me to come out. And
Very good.
thanks everyone for putting up with me.
No, thank you. That is very bi-weekly to me, sounds to me, sorry, twice a week.
Mhm.
When you're saying bi-weekly.
I
you're
mean,
saying
once every
two-
other week.
Every 2 weeks.
Yes, once every 14 days.
But, yeah, I'm not worried about it, it's just funny how my brain. sees
Actually, a
that
lot of
bi-week.
people say that too.
Okay, so it's not.
It's not
me.
just you.
Well, I always have that problem.
I thought it was a little bit funny when Fred told that to me too, but that's just the lingo we both agreed on.
No,
So
it's okay, I just making sure. So you did say every
it's twice a year.
Yeah. One more question. The brood frame. It's just like any other frame, but the bees make it
the bees make it a
no, the
brood frame.
drone frame, excuse me.
The drone frame is actually physically different. So if you
I don't
look at
think
it,
I have a drone.
no, probably not.
You don't, she's saying you could get a growth.
So this is a plastic brood frame, and they have a certain size pattern stamped on there. Your drone frame is going to be green plastic, and it's going to have a different sized pattern.
Yeah,
So instead of having all this tiny brood, you're going to have fewer cells and larger cells. The larger cells are used for drones because drones are so much larger.
yeah.
Do I have drone comb on here?
So that's just a technique, not everybody has green comb.
Not everybody has green comb now.
Yeah.
No,
I'm a
she's
little
saying
confused about
that
that.
if you have a deeper frame, they'll put the comb at the bottom and you said something, I
Yeah.
forget. It
If
creates
you
its
put
own-
a shallow frame and
Yeah.
a deep hive body,
Yes,
they'll draw out the rest of the frame.
correct.
Yeah.
And that'll act like a a drum.
It doesn't always work though. Sometimes they draw out the comb and connect it to the other one.
Okay.
So it's messy and it's not perfect, but if you don't want to actually buy the drone comb, it is something that you can do. I actually kind of like it better because as long as they do draw it out properly and they make that drone comb, it's a lot easier to dispose of.
Yeah.
Instead of having to do your freeze and everything, all you do is you walk over to the trash can, get your hive tool out,
Yeah,
do one slice, and then put it back in.
And they
So,
take
and
care of the rest, they eat it, and like we did on ours, they use that as a resource, right?
they can use some of the brood as resources. You want to get as much of it away as possible.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is, you got your half frame here
Uh-huh.
in your deep box, and they're gonna draw out this other half that doesn't appear on your frame,
Mhm.
call this drone comb. That's gonna be pretty loose when you pick it up, because it's not really connected to much.
Okay.
So you take it over to the trash can, take your hive tool, and slice it,
Slice it,
and
yeah,
that half falls into the trash, and you put the other half back.
oh, okay. All right.
I really look at my combs, I've seen those bubbly, you know, cells. But usually they're on the top and bottom, they're.
Yeah.
Laying, but
Well,
I haven't seen it in the comb.
You just need to have her come out when you're able.
The most common place to see drones, every now and then you see a full frame of drones.
Mhm.
Usually that means they're about to swarm,
Yeah.
but usually you're seeing drones on the outskirts of the brood sphere.
Yeah.
They're not quite as important as the workers, so they want to put it on the outside, so if something happens, it gets really, really cold, the drones die, not the workers.
Makes sense.
That's the hardest thing about being a beekeeper, I think, is reading the combs.
Yes,
So it gets kind of confusing.
That's why we need to have her come out for you. Yeah, well, thank you, we gotta get going, Camille, I'm sorry.
oh, no worries, I kept you guys waiting.
Great
Oh, no, no, thank you, I just love it, thank you,
Thank you.
thanks for doing this. We appreciate you.
We had one of our, we have two hives, one died later, so I split a lot that will come back. Original hive a couple of 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And I couldn't find the queen, I was gonna put the queen in the new hive. But I couldn't find her, so I just made sure that there were some queen cells in both of
That works too.
the hives.
Walk away split.
And so when should I go in and look to see if it actually worked?
Usually I'll go in after about 3 days, because then you'll know, are we having major drift problems? Did the split actually work? I've had it happen where I've done a walkaway split before, come back in 3 days and I don't have a walkaway split anymore. They all went back to the original colony. And then
Okay,
you have to redo the split.
I looked at them after 2 days and in the new hive, the bees, there weren't any bees foraging, but they were, the bees that were inside were busy doing whatever they need to do to get the hive function. So it seemed like they were happy with their situation. So I should just go in and look to see if there's fresh eggs.
Yep. After 3 days, you'll see fresh eggs.
Okay.
After 3 days, you know that any eggs that are there were laid by the queen in that current colony, because all of the others would have hatched.
All right.
All right. That's our task. Probably not today, but. soon.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.